There's an idea I came across years ago that I've never fully recovered from. It says that by the time you turned about 20, you had already lived half your life. Not half your years, you've got decades of those left, hopefully. Half your life as you actually experience it. Half of the felt thing. And the arithmetic behind it is so simple it's almost rude. When you're 1 year old, a year is everything you've ever known. At 10, it's a tenth of you. At 40, it's a 40th, a thin slice of an increasingly large pie, and it goes past accordingly. Stack those diminishing slices up, and the halfway point of your subjective life lands somewhere around 18 or 20. Which means, if that idea is right, most of the life you'll ever feel is already behind you before you've picked a career. I want to be honest about that idea before we go anywhere with it. It's called the proportional theory. It's over a century old, and I think it's too clean. It has the shape of something true rather than the substance of it. Because if it were purely about proportion, time would compress at exactly the same steady rate for everyone, and it plainly doesn't. Ask anyone who's moved country in their 30s, or had their first child, or spent a year seriously ill. Those years didn't shrink. Some of them stretched out longer in memory than the decade around them. So proportion is pointing at something real, but it's not the machine. It's a shadow of the machine. Here's what I think is actually happening, and it comes down to a strange fact about how you measure time at all. You don't have a clock in your head, you have a filing system. When you ask, "Where did this year go?" you're not consulting a timer. You're doing something much cruder. You're rummaging through what you can remember of it and estimating length from volume. A year with lots of distinct retrievable events in it feels long. A year that's mostly a smooth, undifferentiated blur feels like it barely happened. Time, in retrospect, is measured in markers, and your brain only lays down a marker when something is new enough to be worth the storage. Which is why childhood is enormous. Everything is a first. The first time you saw the sea, the first time you understood a joke that wasn't for you, the first time an adult was wrong about something and you knew it. A child's brain is laying down markers constantly because there's nothing else to compare anything to yet. Every day contains information it has to keep. That's not a metaphor about wonder. It's a storage problem. The reason a single summer at 9 years old can feel longer than your entire last year is that the 9-year-old came out of it with 200 distinct things filed, and you came out of last year with maybe 11. Then adolescence and your early 20s arrive, and something worth knowing happens. If you ask people in their 60s or 70s to recall their lives, the memories don't come out evenly spread. There's a bulge. A disproportionate number of what they can retrieve comes from roughly 10 to 30. Psychologists call it the reminiscence bump, and it's one of the more solidly replicated findings in memory research. And you can see why the moment you list what's in those years. First love, first leaving, first job, first betrayal. The first time you decided something enormous with no idea what you were doing. Firsts, densely packed. That period isn't remembered better because you were young and your brain was shiny. It's remembered better because it was crowded with events that had never happened before. And now the part I find genuinely uncomfortable, which is what happens next. Because what comes after that bump isn't decline, it's competence. You get good at your life. You learn the route to work well enough that you stop seeing it. You learn your job well enough to do most of it without deciding anything. You find the 4 meals you cook, the 2 places you sit, the shape of a week that works, and you stop having to think about it, which is precisely the point of learning anything. Expertise is the ability to stop paying attention, and your brain, seeing nothing new, quietly stops filing. 10,000 versions of the same Tuesday get compressed into a single entry marked "that job," and a whole year of your one and only life goes into the archive as a paragraph. So the cruel bit isn't that time speeds up because you're old. It's that time speeds up because you're settled, because you got good at it. The exact things we spend our 20s desperately chasing: stability, a routine that works, competence, a life that doesn't have to be figured out fresh every morning, are the things that make the years disappear. Nobody warns you about that trade. You buy the piece, and the price is paid in felt time, quietly, out of an account you can't see the balance of. There's a second thing tangled up in this, and once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. Consider the strangest complaint people have about their own lives. This week is dragging, and I have no idea where the year went. Both at once. Those should contradict each other, and they don't, because they're two completely different measurements. In the moment, time is measured by attention. A dull Wednesday afternoon crawls because you keep checking, and every check makes it longer. That's why a queue is agony and a good conversation is over in what feels like 10 minutes. But in retrospect, time is measured by memory, and the dull Wednesday leaves nothing behind at all. So you get the worst of both. The boring parts feel long while you're inside them and vanish completely afterward, while the vivid parts fly by in the moment and then last for decades in the archive. Your life is being scored twice by two different judges who never speak to each other. If you want proof of that split, look at what a holiday does to you. A week somewhere unfamiliar goes past in a blink while you're in it. You blink, and it's the last morning, and you're annoyed about it. But wait 6 months and ask how long that week was. It'll have swollen out of all proportion. It'll feel bigger in your memory than the 2 months of ordinary life either side of it, both of which have collapsed into nothing. Same 7 days. Felt short, remembers long. And the reverse is just as reliable. Think of a stretch when you were waiting for something, a notice period, a recovery, a bad job you were counting down. Endless at the time. Ask what actually happened during it, and you'll find you can barely furnish it with 3 specific days. That flip is the whole thing in miniature, and it's worth sitting with because it quietly contradicts how most people plan their lives. We optimize for the version of time we're standing inside. We want the afternoon to be comfortable, the week to be manageable, the year to go smoothly. Every one of those preferences buys ease now and pays for it later in the archive. The holiday is uncomfortable in all sorts of small ways, which is exactly why it survives. Comfort is frictionless, and frictionless things leave no trace. And this, to me, is the actual practical thing in all of it, because it tells you the fast weeks aren't the problem. The blank ones are. A week where you were slammed and absorbed and it went by in a flash, that week will be there in 10 years. A week you spent mildly bored, scrolling, waiting for something, ticking off obligations. That one felt endless on Thursday and is already gone. If you want a life that feels long, you are not looking for a life that feels slow. That's the error almost everyone makes. Slow and empty is the fastest thing there is. So what do you actually do, given that? And I'm going to be careful here, because this is where these conversations usually collapse into someone telling you to take a different route to work, and I think that advice is nearly worthless. Not wrong exactly, just far too small for the size of the problem. Changing your commute does not buy you a year. What actually seems to work is bigger and more annoying. Putting genuinely unfamiliar things in your calendar at a scale that requires you to be a bit incompetent again. Not new experiences in the brochure sense, things you're bad at. Because the marker gets laid down when your brain has to actually process something rather than pattern match it, and nothing forces processing like being out of your depth. That's why the year you learn to do something difficult is still legible to you, and the 3 easy years after it aren't. Which brings me to the honest catch, and I'd rather say it than sell you a clean ending. That's uncomfortable. Being bad at things in your 40s is a genuinely worse experience than being bad at things at 19, because at 19 you were supposed to be. There's a reason people stop. Novelty costs something: energy, dignity, the small daily humiliation of not knowing what you're doing. And settling into competence is one of the great pleasures of adult life, honestly earned. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that pleasure is a trap. It isn't. It's just expensive in a currency nobody quotes you up front. And I don't think you can reverse this. Not really. You're not going to get another 9-year-old summer. The proportional thing is partly real. The years genuinely are smaller fractions of you now. And no amount of pottery classes is going to make your 50s feel like your teens. What you can do is stop the freefall. There's a very large difference between a decade that leaves behind 2 memories and a decade that leaves behind 40. And that difference is not luck, and it's not age. It's how much of it you spent doing things your brain considered worth writing down. So here's what I'd actually ask you to do with this, and it's not a life overhaul. Try to name the last week you can genuinely remember. Not recognize, remember. A week where you could tell me something specific that happened on a particular day. For a lot of people, that's going to be further back than they're comfortable with. And the gap between now and that week is the real number here. It's not a number about your age, it's a number about how long you've been on autopilot. Tell me what that week was, and how long ago. I'm curious how far back people have to go, and I suspect the answers are going to say more about the shape of modern life than about anyone's memory.